For this cause many are weak and sickly among you, and many sleep. That's a nice way of saying they're dead. They're taking dirt naps because they have unworthily taken the Lord's Supper. You're listening to Focus on the Bible, a production of Focus Evangelistic Ministries, Incorporated. Welcome to Focus on the Bible. I'm Josiah Coyle, your host, and today I am absolutely stoked for this episode because we're talking about a question that we get all the time, and that is, if doing good works and avoiding evil is not what saves somebody, why would a saved person do good and avoid evil? And like I said, we get this question all the time because we talk in every episode about how we can know that we have everlasting life. It is by faith in Jesus Christ. Romans 3:28 says that a man is justified by faith without the deeds of the law. And that's not just talking about Old Testament ritual laws like don't shave your eyebrows, don't eat shrimp or pork, or wear more than one kind of fabric at the same time. Those were ethical laws as well, like don't blaspheme, don't steal, don't murder, don't take another man's wife. The law, even the ethical laws, cannot save anybody because nobody's ever lived up to them except for Jesus the Christ. And that is why we can have everlasting life by faith in him alone. Just to give this further support, although we don't need to, the Bible only needs to say it one time for it to be true. John 3:18, Jesus talking to Nicodemus says, "He that believeth on him is not condemned." He says, "He that believeth not is condemned already." Their default status is condemned. Why? He says, because they have not believed on the only begotten Son of God. Romans 5 verse 1 says that we are justified by faith. And verse 2 says we have access by faith. Titus 3:5 says, not by works of righteousness that you've done, but according to his mercy, he saved you. Ephesians 2:8-9, of course, says, for by grace are you saved through faith, and that not of yourselves, it is the gift of God, not of works, lest any man should boast. I think that's sufficient support, but if you would like to hear an entire episode defending why everlasting life is based on faith and nothing else, I'm going to link that episode in the description of this one so that you can hear that. Let's move on to this question, though. Why should somebody live a good life if that's not what saves them? Now, this question assumes that the only recourse that God has for punishing or disciplining or chastening his children is kicking them out of the family. Now, just imagine your father, if you ever did anything wrong, he threatened to kick you out of the family. Would you say that that's a good, loving father? More precisely, would you say he's a godly father? I'm willing to bet that you would say no. And even if he professed to be a Christian, most people would call him hypocritical because they would say, that's not loving, that's not gracious, that's not forgiving. He threatens to throw you out of the family. Is throwing a child out of the family the only way that a father could discipline their child? This is the picture that we paint of God, as though if we sin, God's only choice is to kick us out of the family, and if he doesn't, then we have a license to sin, and we have reason to take advantage of grace. Now, I saw a Catholic creator not long ago call the idea that you can't lose your salvation, which the Bible clearly supports. He said that's the most unhistorical doctrine of Protestantism. Now, first of all, I don't care if it's historical or not, because you can, as he did, go all the way back to first century Christians and see what they wrote. And that's great. But I have some more writings from first century Christians. One in which Jesus says, whoever drinks the water that I give them will never thirst. So you can quote whoever you want to. I have the words of Jesus right here, and he says, whosoever believeth in me shall not perish. I think that's pretty straightforward, don't you? Now, at the end of the day, if somebody is standing at the gate of heaven, and I don't think it necessarily works right this, but for the sake of our human imaginations, imagine there's two people. Person A believes that salvation is by putting their faith in Jesus and also doing good works. Person B believes that salvation is only through faith. Now, this Catholic creator said, just as the Pope did, he quoted the Pope as well, salvation is by God's grace through faith, okay? Person 2 believes that salvation is by grace through faith and only that. But they have to do good works and avoid certain sins in order to keep that salvation. When they stand at the gate of heaven, if they are asked, why should you gain access to God's perfect heaven? Both of them are going to say, because I believe Jesus, and also I did good works. And even if your good works, if I'm trusting 5% in the fact that I've never committed a felony, well, then I'm only trusting 95% in Jesus Christ. Is Jesus Christ not 100% sufficient to save us into everlasting life? Of course he is. So my question is, how can something that is A, characteristically by God's grace and not our works, and B, which is everlasting by definition, suddenly be A, contractual based on our behavior, and B, probationary? That idea that we could lose our salvation is an exact 180 from the entire essence of what the gospel is, which is that we can have eternal life, and that life is in the Son, not probationary life and not based on what we do. So now let's answer the question. Thank you for bearing with me up to this point. Let's go to 1 Corinthians chapter 3, verse 9. What we're going to see here is a picture of a house that's being built, and that house represents our life. And as saved people, the foundation of that house is, of course, Jesus Christ. It says, for we are laborers together with God. You're God's husbandry. You're like God's garden. You are God's building. According to the grace of God, which is given unto me as a wise master builder, I've laid the foundation, another builds thereon. But let every man take heed how he buildeth thereupon. Okay? The foundation is Christ. Paul says he laid the foundation. He's talking about to them, which this is addressed to save people. He says, I deliver the gospel to you. Now it is your job to build the house on that foundation. Now, there are two kinds of people who Christ is the foundation of. Verse 12, now if any man build upon this foundation gold, silver, precious stones, wood, hay, stubble, every man's work will be made manifest. That means it's going to be evident. For that day shall declare it, because it shall be revealed by fire, and the fire shall try every man's work of what sort it is. Now, here's the two kinds of people. Person number one, if any man's work abide, which he hath built thereupon, he shall receive a reward. That's person A. He's receiving a reward. Person B, if any man's work shall be burned, he shall suffer eternal condemnation in hellfire. No, he shall suffer loss, but he himself shall be saved, yet so as by fire. His building, the life that he built on the foundation of Jesus Christ, both have the foundation of Jesus Christ. That's how we're assured that they have everlasting life. He says we are laborers together with God. But this one builds a terrible house based on earthly, worldly things. And what happens? He suffers loss of rewards. That's number one. This is one reason why you should live a holy, that means set apart for God, and righteous life. Because otherwise we'll suffer loss. Now there's another example, a real example given in this book of people who suffer earthly loss as well. Let's go to 1 Corinthians chapter 11. We'll start in verse 27. It says, wherefore whosoever shall eat this bread and drink this cup of the Lord unworthily shall be guilty of the body and blood of the Lord. Now I would say to our Catholic friend, is that not something that is about the worst thing that you could be guilty in? Drinking, taking communion, taking the Eucharist unworthily, and being guilty of the body and blood of the Lord. It says, but let a man examine himself, and so let him eat of that bread and drink of that cup. For he that eateth and drinketh unworthily eateth and drinketh damnation. Is this eternal condemnation that we're talking about? It says he drinketh damnation to himself, not discerning the Lord's body. Very serious. For this cause many are weak and sickly among you, and many sleep. That's a nice way of saying they're dead. They're taking dirt naps because they have unworthily taken the Lord's Supper. Serious crime, serious offense. And many of them are weak, they're sick, or they're dead because of this. For if we would judge ourselves, We should not be judged. But when we are judged, now people see judge just like they see fire. They assume eternal condemnation and hellfire. And that is not the only way to apply these two words. But when we are judged, we are chastened of the Lord. That means disciplined, that we should not be condemned with the world. It says right there, we're chastened by the Lord so that we will not be condemned with the world. We're not condemned eternally, but we are disciplined. And that is a serious discipline that these people brought upon themselves. Now, some might say, well, but we have the fruits of the Spirit, right? If you have the Spirit, then you should also have love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and meekness, right? We should, yes. Yes, if we are walking in the Spirit, then we will have those things. But when we put our faith in Jesus Christ, what is our foundation? Jesus Christ. That foundation is not getting washed away. Our building might fall apart, might wash away, might be burned. If our building is worldly things, if we're not walking with Jesus Christ. But look with me at Hebrews chapter 12. This is talking about the chastening or the discipline of the Lord. Hebrews chapter 12, and we'll start in let's start in verse 5. It says, "And ye have forgotten the exhortation which speaketh unto you as children. My son, despise not thou the chastening of the Lord, nor faint when thou art rebuked of him. For whom the Lord loveth, he chasteneth and scourgeth every son whom he receiveth. If you endure chastening, God deals with you as with sons. For what son is he whom the Father chasteneth not? But if you be without chastisement, whereof all are partakers, then you're bastards and not sons." It says, you're in the family of God. When you go astray, God will discipline you. If God's not disciplining you, if you've never been disciplined by God, well, then he's not dealing with you as though you were a son. This is not saying if you go astray, God will kick you out of the family. That's not what God does. That's not the kind of father that we have. It says, "Furthermore, we have had fathers of our flesh which corrected us, and we gave them respect, reverence. Shall we not much rather be in subjection unto the Father of spirits and live? For they verily for a few days, like for a time when we were children, they chastened us after their own pleasure, but he for our profit, that we might be partakers of his holiness." Now, what is holy? Holy is being set apart for God. "No chastening for the present seemeth to be joyous, but grievous. Nevertheless, afterward it yieldeth the peaceable fruit of righteousness unto them which are exercised thereby." What yields the fruit of righteousness? When we're chastened, we can yield the fruit of righteousness unto them which are exercised thereby. That's what we're talking about. We want to be exercised to righteousness, and God chastens us to keep us on track. He doesn't say, I'm going to break this covenant that I made with you forever because you've dropped the ball in whatever it is. When we drop the ball, God remains faithful. 2 Timothy 2:13, "If we believe not, yet he abideth faithful. He cannot deny himself." And if you're saved and you go and you do a bunch of sin, does that mean that you need to get re-saved? No. Hebrews tells us that Jesus Christ died once and for all. I can pull that up for you. Hebrews chapter 10, verse 10, "By the which will we are sanctified through the offering of the body of Jesus Christ once." 12, "But this man, after he had offered one sacrifice for sins forever, sat down on the right hand of God." 14, "For by one offering he hath perfected forever them that are sanctified." I'd say that's a pretty great first century writing. If you want to know that you have everlasting life, it's not based on our works. If you want to make sure that you still have everlasting life, it's still not by our works, but by the sacrifice of Jesus Christ, which is perfect and 100% sufficient to save when we place our faith in him alone. And that is the good news that we see when we focus on the Bible. Thanks so much for joining us. If you like what you heard, we'd like to ask you to share it with someone who could benefit from it, because we're here to help people to know God better and to make him known. People all over the world are desperate to hear the good news of the gospel of Jesus Christ. You can learn more about our ministries at femionline.com. That's all for now, so until next time, don't forget to focus on the Bible.